February 1983. A young man named Don Decker prepared to leave jail. He had been granted a furlough for a somber occasion, his grandfather's funeral. Decker, incarcerated for receiving stolen property, carried a weight of grief. Little did he know, a far stranger ordeal awaited him. This furlough would become a descent into a chilling mystery. It was a bizarre case that would defy explanation. Decker traveled to Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. The funeral was held at his grandfather's home. Accounts of Decker's behavior at the funeral are unsettling. Some attendees observed an unnerving change in his demeanor. He seemed withdrawn, lost in thought. Others described him as visibly agitated. He clenched his fists and muttered to himself. A darkness seemed to have overtaken him. Following the funeral, Decker went to the home of his friends, Bob and Jeannie Kaya. The night was heavy with grief, and Decker, feeling the weight of loss, sought solace in the familiar warmth of the Kaya household. He needed a place to stay, a refuge from the sorrow that clung to him like a shadow. The Kayas, known for their hospitality, were more than willing to offer him a room. The Kayas welcomed him into their home with open arms, their smiles a brief respite from the gloom that had settled over Decker's heart. However, the strange occurrences began almost immediately. The house, which had always been a place of comfort, now seemed to harbor an unsettling presence. Decker was washing up in an upstairs bathroom, trying to shake off the day's events. The old mirror above the sink reflected his tired face, but something felt off. He felt a chill run down his spine, a coldness that seemed to seep from the very walls of the house. It was as if the air itself had turned icy. Looking in the mirror, he saw something that made him jump back in fear. A fleeting image, a shadowy figure that seemed to stand just behind him, vanished as quickly as it appeared. A golden crown seemed to materialize on his head. There was no crown. It was a trick of the light, or perhaps something more sinister. Decker rushed downstairs, shaken and disturbed. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of what he had seen. But the strangeness was far from over. The house seemed alive with whispers and flickering lights, shadows dancing in the corners of his vision. Water began to drip from the ceiling, a slow, steady rhythm that echoed through the silent house. It was as if the house itself was weeping. It appeared to be coming from the floorboards above. The Kayas were baffled, their faces etched with confusion and concern. There were no pipes in that area of the house. The source of the water remained a mystery, adding to the growing sense of unease. There was no logical explanation for the water. The Kayas and Decker were left to wonder if the house held secrets that were better left undiscovered. Confused and concerned, the Kayas contacted their landlord. They explained the inexplicable water. The landlord, equally perplexed, arrived to investigate. He checked the attic. He examined the roof. There was no leak, no source for the water. Growing increasingly alarmed, the Kayas decided to call the police. Officers John Bowen and Richard Walbert responded to the call. They entered the house to find water dripping from the ceiling. The officers were skeptical at first, but they too were soon baffled. They could find no source for the water. They interviewed Decker and the Kayas. They examined the house from top to bottom. There was simply no explanation for the dripping water. It seemed to defy the laws of physics. With the mystery still unsolved, Decker's furlough came to an end. He had hoped for some clarity, but instead, he was left with more questions than answers. The eerie occurrences that had plagued him seemed to follow him like a shadow, refusing to be left behind. He was escorted back to the Monroe County Correctional Facility, a place that now felt even more foreboding. The guards, who had heard whispers of his strange experiences, eyed him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The officers assumed that the strange events were over. They were wrong. Little did they know the true extent of the bizarre happenings was yet to unfold. Conversations among the staff were filled with speculation, but no one could have predicted what was coming next. Back in his cell, Decker's bizarre experiences continued. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the air felt thick with an unexplainable tension. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being twisted around him. This time his cellmate witnessed the inexplicable. The look of shock on his face was undeniable. He had heard Decker's stories, but seeing it firsthand was a different matter entirely. The cellmate's disbelief quickly turned to fear. Water began to drip from the ceiling of their cell. At first it was just a few drops, but soon it turned into a steady stream. The source of the water was a mystery. There were no pipes or leaks that could explain it. The cellmate alerted a guard. His voice was tinged with panic as he called out, hoping that someone could provide an explanation, or at least stop the water. The guard, skeptical but curious, investigated. He had heard the rumors, but seeing the water with his own eyes was something else. He inspected the ceiling, looking for any logical source, but found none. He, too, was stunned by what he saw. The water seemed to materialize out of thin air, defying all logic and reason. The guard's expression shifted from skepticism to sheer astonishment. Water was dripping from the ceiling, seemingly out of thin air. It was as if the laws of physics had been momentarily suspended, leaving everyone in the cell bewildered and uneasy. Decker was taken to Warden Dave Keenhold's office. The guards hoped that the warden could make sense of the situation, or at least provide some guidance on what to do next. The warden listened to the story with disbelief. He had heard many strange tales during his tenure, but this was unlike anything he had encountered before. His skepticism was evident, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in Decker's voice. However, as Decker sat in his office, water began to drip from the ceiling there as well. The warden's eyes widened as he saw the droplets forming and falling, just as they had in Decker's cell. The warden watched in astonishment as water dripped onto his desk and even onto his own clothing. It was undeniable now. Something truly inexplicable was happening, and it was centered around Decker. Section 5. The Smell of Evil. In the heart of the old penitentiary, a sense of dread hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The walls seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and the shadows danced with a life of their own. The warden, shaken by the events, decided to call for a higher power. His hands trembled as he dialed the number, each ring echoing his growing fear. He knew he needed help beyond the physical realm. He contacted a local minister, a man known for his dealings with the supernatural. The warden's voice was barely a whisper, laden with desperation and hope. The minister arrived at the jail, his presence bringing a sliver of hope. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the dark corners as if expecting something to leap out. He was immediately struck by an overwhelming stench. It was a smell unlike any other, a putrid mix of decay and malevolence that seemed to cling to the very walls. It was a foul, rotting smell that permeated the air, making it almost impossible to breathe. The minister knew this was no ordinary odor. It was a sign of something deeply wrong. He questioned Decker, trying to understand the source of the strange events. The room was thick with tension, every word hanging heavily in the air. Decker remained withdrawn, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. It was as if he was looking through the minister, seeing something far beyond the physical realm. The minister, convinced that something evil was at work, confronted Decker. His voice was firm, demanding answers, but Decker's silence was unnerving. He accused him of being possessed. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with meaning. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. Decker suddenly screamed, a chilling primal sound. It echoed through the halls, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He then collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. His body shook with each sob, the weight of his torment evident in every tear. The minister performed an impromptu exorcism. The dripping water ceased. The foul smell dissipated, the air seemed to clear, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a dark cloud had been banished. Decker was left exhausted and shaken, the strange events seemingly behind him. The minister watched over him, knowing that while the immediate danger had passed, the scars of the encounter would linger. Section 6. Possessed by the deceased. Decker himself offered a possible explanation for the bizarre events. He believed that he had been possessed by his grandfather's spirit. He claimed that he had been angry at his grandfather's death. He felt that his grandfather had abandoned him. He suggested that his anger had somehow summoned his grandfather's spirit. This malevolent entity had caused the strange and unsettling occurrences. Decker's explanation, while unusual, was the only one that seemed to fit the events. The water dripping, the foul smell, the sudden changes in his behavior, all pointed to something beyond the realm of normal understanding. Section 7-9. Witnesses. The events at the Kears house and the jail were witnessed by numerous individuals. 9 people, including the Kyers, the landlord, 4 police officers, and the warden, gave official statements. They all testified to witnessing the inexplicable water dripping. They described the lack of any logical explanation. Their testimonies added weight to the bizarre case. It wasn't just Decker's word against theirs. Multiple credible witnesses had experienced the strange phenomena firsthand. Section 8. An enduring enigma. The case of Don Decker remains a mystery to this day. There has never been a satisfactory explanation for the dripping water, the foul smell, or Decker's unusual behavior. Some dismiss the case as a hoax. They claim that Decker somehow faked the events. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. The witnesses were credible. The events occurred in multiple locations. And Decker himself seemed genuinely terrified by what had transpired. Section 9. A legacy of questions. The case of Don Decker continues to fascinate and perplex researchers of the paranormal. It stands as a chilling reminder that there are still things in this world that we do not understand. Was Don Decker truly possessed by his grandfather's spirit? Was there another, more rational explanation for the bizarre events, or was it all just an elaborate hoax? These questions remain unanswered. The case of Don Decker remains an enigma, a chilling tale of the unexplained.